Running Light Ministry podcast is brought to you by listeners like you. You can support these podcasts by making a gift to the ministries at runninglight.org.
Welcome to the Running Light Ministries podcast number
100 and something.
126.
Yeah, there it is.
And my name's Beau.
And I'm Peter.
And we are going to talk to you guys a little off the cuff because we don't have much time. And we kind of just jumped into the studio today and thought, hey, let's kick something out. And there's always good stuff to talk about when it comes to sex and love and lust and porn and Bible stuff and all kinds of things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So, and culture. And this is, you're going to read us something from our culture.
Right.
And so lay it on us.
Yeah, it's interesting. So last week we talked about the Supreme Court decision and how Roe versus Wade has the potential to be overturned. And we'll see how that goes due to a Mississippi law. And so we talked a little bit about fatherhood and about how a lot of people, when they communicate about the pro-life versus pro-choice argument, men kind of get left out of the conversation. And me and Beau did our best to try to show how that is an example of chauvinism. So the very amount of chauvinism that people talk about that they use to justify leaving men out of the conversation is itself an example of chauvinism, because it enables selfish, bigoted men to be free of their responsibilities as fathers. And that's really not great for our society, and we see that.
Yeah, so that one was on episode 125, Abortion in the Male.
Yeah.
That's what I titled that one.
So this one could be called Abortion in the Female, because a woman named Elizabeth Spears, a columnist at the New York Times, she wrote an opinion piece there last week that gives a very interesting view of motherhood. And so I wanted to go over it here. Now, in this article, she tries to make the argument that Roe versus Wade ought not to be overturned because it is the best possible option for women who do not want to be pregnant. During the deliberations last week, Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who's the newest appointee to the Supreme Court, made the argument that, hey, we have sanctuary states, sanctuary cities within the United States. These are places where women who have an unwanted pregnancy can drive to and literally drop off their unwanted child, and the state will take possession of the child and make sure that they are adopted into a family that will take care of them. In this article, this woman argues that adoption is more traumatic for the mother and the child than abortion. Now, she never really gets around to the argument for the child, why it's better for the child to be killed. But she does make a very strong argument for the mother. And this is very interesting because at the beginning of the article, she talks about how she herself was adopted into a loving home and later got in contact with her birth mother. And now all of them have a relationship. And she does mention that both her birth mother and her adopted mother are very much pro-life. And they point to her as a reason for why they're pro-life, because the birth mother's like, yeah, if I would have aborted you, I wouldn't have a relationship with you. You'd be dead. But she makes this really bizarre argument, and she gets to the crux of it. And I want to read this because I do believe it gets to the heart of how our society views womanhood today, and especially motherhood. And we'll talk about that later on. But anyway, this is quoting from the article. If the court overturns Roe versus Wade, many women will be forced, now get that word, forced to give birth to children they did not want or did not feel that they could afford to support. While pregnant, they will undergo the bonding with a child that happens by biological design as an embryo develops into a living, breathing, conscious human. Now, she never does explain when, in her mind, the child becomes a conscious human.
Yeah, there's already a lot to talk about just in that opening statement.
A lot of interesting stuff. Let me finish this paragraph real quick though, and then we could start breaking down some of her interesting ideas. So she says that, and then she says, and then a child will be taken away. The right likes to suggest that abortion is a traumatic experience for women, a last resort, a painful memory. But adoption is often just as traumatic as the right thinks abortion is, if not more so, as a woman has to relinquish not a lump of cells, but a fully formed baby she has to live with for 9 months. Now, notice how she describes what pregnancy is like. Now, get this. This is just so interesting. This is one of the paradoxes of pregnancy. Something alien is usurping your body and sapping you of nutrition and energy, but you're programmed to gleefully enable it, and you become desperately protective of it. It's a kind of biological brainwashing, and this often happens whether you want it or not. So that's her view of motherhood, that your body gets hijacked by an alien force, and you're brainwashed to like it. So it's almost like she's depicting like a Helsinki syndrome, like a Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, and the problem with this logic is that it's contradictory to itself.
Right.
Right? She says, well, if your brain's hijacked to think a certain way and to act a certain way, then why would you be upset at the biology that is... How would you even know that the biology is hijacking your... Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If it's doing it,
right,
and that's been going on forever, where someone's biology is to, force you to like your child in the womb.
Yeah.
If it's forcing you to do it,
that would be like me saying my body's forcing me to like Krispy Kreme donuts. Because it's just, I didn't give permission to my taste buds to enjoy the flavor of the donut, so it's forcing it upon me.
Yeah, and it's like getting kind of pissed off.
Right.
At man, why do I taste things?
Right. And this is like the craziest thing. So she is a mother, and I got a feel for her kid, who will probably, she said he's 6, so he could read this article and read about how his mom views her relationship with him. I got a feel for the kid a little bit. But at any rate, when she talks about this, she is taking one of the most beautiful aspects of women being able to bear children, which is the ability for a woman to bond deeply and intimately with her child before they're born.
It would be like, I'm thinking of examples of this, but it's kind of, this might be a crude one, but it's kind of like a person who, a male who looks at a female or looks at someone attractive that they find attractive, and they get an erection.
Right.
And
it's biological brainwashing.
right.
My darn body.
It's like, oh my gosh, this body's crazy.
And then getting mad at the woman for doing that to you, like getting pissed off, like, you're so beautiful that you biologically brainwashed me to be sexually attracted to you. And that's kind of what's happening with this woman. She's getting upset at her unborn child for quote unquote forcing her
body
forcing her
which is forcing her mind
to like the baby that she's describing as an alien force sapping her of her nutrition.
Yeah,
so.
if it's I still can't get over the logic that if it's forcing your body to like the child, then how can you even have the understanding of not liking the child?
That's right. Like, is there, like, if it's something that naturally biologically happens, then is there an example of someone who doesn't?
Right.
Who wouldn't be attached to her child as she's developing the child.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, I mean, there's so many logical fallacies in this. It's kind of crazy, but one of the big ones is the idea that a lot of abortions happen once the child is sentient. They're conscious. They're kicking. They're moving. You feel them.
Yeah.
They're happening in the second
trimester.
trimester.
It's not just a lump of cells. She uses that quote, lump of cells.
Right. And I like what some people say. It's like, well, we're all lump of cells. Some of us are lumpier than others. We're just a more developed lump of cells than an unborn child. That's it.
Yeah. So, but she does use some pretty interesting words,
right?
To describe a child that is in the womb.
Right.
Alien.
Right.
Which is alien the right word to use when a woman's body, a female's body, is biologically constructed
right.
to hold a zygote and it grows.
Right. And that's the main thing that's so interesting about these arguments. And I want to point it out because I think a lot of people miss it. And they miss it and they don't see that by engaging with this type of language, they are affirming the other side. So a lot of the examples that are utilized to justify abortion are used of like, you heard it in the beginning, you're forcing a woman to stay pregnant. Some of the examples that they'll use as counter arguments is like, would you force somebody to provide medical aid to a stranger if an accident happened? Something like that. And what they're doing is they're taking this idea that pregnancy, and this is important, pregnancy is not natural. Now that's so weird, but that's the framework. That's the mentality that's being brought in. And that's why I wanted to read it to you. And I'm glad you picked up on it, that's like her argument, that this is an unnatural, alien, foreign thing that's happening, totally ignoring biology, that your body was literally meant to do this. Yeah. And you're getting mad that people are quote unquote forcing you to do it. That would be, again, like someone who's bulimic, who throws up after meals, and someone says, hey, you shouldn't do that. And they say, you're going to force me to carry this burger? You're going to force me to digest it? How dare you? This is bodily autonomy. It would sound so ridiculous because you recognize that's what your body is supposed to do. Like, that's the natural function of what's going on.
Yeah. It's so contrary to biology.
Right.
The way she's wording this. Programmed, she uses that term. We're like, programmed, lump of cells, alien. We're forced.
Right.
No one forced your body. No one forced anything on your body.
Right.
Where does she get that?
Right.
No one forces semen to come out of someone's penis.
Right.
That is something that biologically happens.
And it's kind of crazy because I noticed this language showing up a couple years ago in regards to the transgender issue. And I just never really was able to understand it until I read this. I was like, oh, like it clicked. Because people were talking about, a couple years ago, the conversation started of giving children puberty blockers to prevent them from going through puberty. And the idea is you're going to force them to go through puberty. And it was such a weird, I was like, wait, what? Like, you can't, you're talking about something natural. You're talking about something that the body naturally does. What do you mean force? It's not like some scientist is holding this kid down and forcing them. In fact, when you take a pill, that pill is forcing your body not to go through it. And the same thing with abortion. You're forcing the body to not do what it's intended to do, and you're killing someone else in the process. So they're framing it in the idea of what I want to do is the natural, and whatever else is happening, regardless if it's a product of naturalism, is unnatural.
Yeah, which is so odd.
Right.
And again, this is where we're at in the culture.
Right.
Is that, you say you're progressive, but you're not really for the progressive ideas anymore.
Right.
You're actually for some other idea, but you've still labeled it, progressive. And and this happens all in all kinds everywhere. Hey, Hitler said he was a Christian at one point.
Right.
Nothing really Christian about wiping out millions of people.
Right.
But yet he, towed that line. And here you have people that say that they're, for naturalism.
Right. And humanism.
Humanism.
Right.
And yet what you're saying isn't very really pro-naturalism.
Right.
It's actually forcing harm on something that is naturally going on in your body.
It's actually scientism.
Yeah.
So what you have is, I like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Is like the granddaddy of all of the modern sci-fi classics.
Yeah.
And in that book, there's a lot to it. But the idea there was the fear that man's scientific prowess would become something unnatural, that man would start organizing and actually engineering the human experience apart from the natural, right? And the ultimate example in Frankenstein is giving life to someone unnaturally through scientific means as opposed to natural means. And it was considered an abomination. So that was the fear, that was the horror. Nowadays, it's like I feel like people today would have to watch Frankenstein and see Frankenstein as the hero, right? He's the hero that is undoing naturalism. Like he's undoing naturalism to provide through science or through scientific advancements to do whatever he wants to the body. And in C.S. Lewis's very fantastic book, The Abolition of Man, he was afraid. The reason why he titled the book that is because he felt that man's scientific endeavors would destroy what it means to be a human. Because in other words, he said, if we're engineering ourselves, then we're no longer men, because men or mankind are developed through nature. Like we identify them through natural processes and through certain character qualities. He's like, if we're engineering ourselves, you could call us whatever you want, but he's like, we're not men anymore, though. We're not mankind. And his interesting sci-fi weird theory 60 years ago is now reality for us. Like that's the world we're living in, where it is the abolition of man, where people are seeing the most natural process in the world, and that is bearing children, because without that process, we're all dead, right? They're seeing the most natural process in the world as unnatural and even bad, even a little bit evil, if you take her language very seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, I just was thinking that, and what you're quoting with C.S. Lewis and The Abolition of Man, I was reading Marcus Aurelius and some of the meditations, and as a Stoic, he was really into this idea that we're kind of, we're just elements, and we're just a part of the big, a part of something much bigger.
Right.
And our elements might transition, from this state to the next, but he says, why be afraid of that? You're still just elements,
right?
And but he sees us in the collective,
right?
That we're part of the collective, and of elements, and it seems very natural. It seems like in Stoicism this is a very natural kind of philosophy that just stems from observable science,
right?
That we're just a part of the living beings out there, and whatever's constructed in our bodies and how our bodies function, it's all part of the naturalistic world,
right?
And we are a part of that,
right?
And it just seems like the way she's talking goes against thousands of years of
right.
philosophy.
Right.
It's like and
human history,
and human history.
Any amount of wisdom, yeah.
Yeah, any amount of thinking,
right.
Anybody just would be like, whoa, what you're talking about, aliens and force, you're being forced, and so the crux of her thing is obviously political,
right.
Because she's making no sense, biologically,
right.
So she's obviously pushing a political thing, and she's trying to structure her story, her article, to kind of fit a position politically.
Right.
But she's saying that abortion is not as traumatic as an adoption.
Right.
And do you want to read more of it?
No, I think that kind of just sums up her main point, because it's very short, and that's essentially what she's saying. But again, think about that for a second. When I just wrote a book about trauma, and when it comes to traumatic experiences, a traumatic experience is when something happens to you that is very distant from what ought to happen to you. So, for instance, we don't take things simply because they're painful as being traumatic. So if someone goes through a childbirth, right? Childbirth is one of the more painful experiences you could go through. You're not going to have PTSD because that's a natural occurrence. Or even someone going through very painful things with their body, even going through aging processes. It's not traumatic because that's normal. We only assign trauma to something when it is distinct from the normal. And the distance between what ought to happen and what did happen, as that distance grows, the trauma grows with it. So, for instance, sex is a natural thing, but when it's forced upon you, then it becomes traumatic because that's not how it ought to be happening inside your life. Now, interestingly here, she's taking abortion, which is a stopping of the natural process. Someone going in and violently taking something, killing a life, taking a life, and stopping the natural process of your body. And by the way, your body has to figure that out, right? So if a woman goes through an abortion, your body's not prepared for that because it's amping up hormones, it's amping up, like your hips are widening. All these things are happening biologically to you when you get pregnant. And when you just stop being pregnant, your body freaks out a little bit. This even happened to myself and my wife when we miscarried, because that's what happened. Something unnatural happened. The baby died as opposed to her body being able to carry the baby to term. And her hormones freaked out. Like her body went through a huge traumatic thing because that's unnatural. But here, and this is the crazy thing, she's taking it as, no, it's more traumatic to let your body do what it's supposed to do. And then because of your financial situation, to give the baby up, than it would be to have someone interfere with the natural process and literally destroy a life. That would be less traumatic for you.
Yeah, and when it sounds like an absolute almost statement, right? Like speaking in absolutes.
Right.
It's much more traumatic. Well, the question is how much more?
Right.
Like, what are you measuring this against?
Right.
Like, what do you mean, like, by this?
Right.
Like, how many people have been adopted in the planet?
Right.
I mean, obviously, we know for a fact, like, we definitely know for a fact that we can't interview someone that's been aborted.
Right. You can't. How was that experience for you of being killed?
Yeah. So we know scientifically, I think, very good evidence. It's definitely testable, repeatable, and verifiable.
But what we know about humans is that they don't seem to want to die. Right? So we seem to not want that to happen.
You're right.
And it definitely goes against our biology. Now, there's an interesting part in the article, too, where she talks about meeting her biological sister. And she talks about the trauma with her biological sister because her sister was able to bond with her while she was in the womb. And she was like, so I knew you, I had a relationship with you, and then you were gone, and I didn't know where you were. So I had like this cosmic longing for something that I wasn't really sure of. Well, it's like, yeah, that happened, but wouldn't it have been worse if you were killed? And then she would never be able to see you again? Like, when that longing, like, logically, wouldn't it be worse?
Yeah.
If you were just totally taken away?
Well, again, when you speak in absolutes, like, hey, it's more traumatic to be adopted than to be aborted. Again, you can't talk in that way because you can't interview someone who's aborted.
Right.
And you certainly can interview people that are not aborted and that have been adopted. But then it's going to be based on, of course, their a subjective opinion.
Right.
Some people have had really good experiences in adoption, and they're going to say, I think it was good. Mm-hmm. And other people are going to say, well, I don't think that was a really good, situation for me. Or, mothers, even if you interview mothers, you're going to have a wide range of opinion on what was considered traumatic to them or not.
Yeah.
And what they are measuring that feeling of trauma based on.
Yeah.
Like, was it a 10? Was it a 2? The kind of trauma that you were going through compared to what?
Right.
Again, but it's all one-sided. You can't, to say like, oh, the aborting a child was less traumatic.
Right.
Traumatic to who?
Right.
Yeah,
not to the child.
Yeah.
And you would never know because you can't do the other way, right? If you abort, you can't adopt. So you're right. It is very subjective and weird. But one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because it's in your book, it's in your first book, Porn to Pastor, you make a very unpopular and sexist claim in there that I want to confront you about.
Yes.
Where you talk about the idea of a woman's role in society being destroyed in our current culture.
Yeah.
And you do point to the idea of what makes a woman special, that she is a womb. And, man, how could you write something
So bad.
so misogynistic?
I know. Well, I don't think of myself as a deep thinker, but I just kind of looked at the obvious.
Yeah.
That over the millennials of years, that humans have been doing this thing called reproduction.
Right.
My thought was that if you take away from a society that which is most valuable in a biological way in humans, if you take away the value of that, then what are you left with? And that was something that really hit me when I was writing that section of the book.
Right.
Is that has our society just taken something that has been very important all throughout history for females, and has just really stripped females of this biology of being stoked that they have a womb, and the ramifications for having a womb, and really what has it done? The stripping away of that value in the society, and so I kind of see that in really seeking to become more valuable by becoming, again, more like a man, even though they want to be, special. They succumb to this patriarchy once again that we've spoken of again. So where they once again, females go, who do they want to be like? Men.
Right.
They want to, in a sense, de-womb themselves.
Right.
And when you de-womb yourself, now you're becoming like a biological male,
right,
who does not
Without
have a womb.
Right.
And so we don't have a womb, and so we are just man.
Right.
But a woman is a woman.
Right.
She's a man with a womb.
Right.
And so now you have a society that has male in a sense. And what has that done to the society?
Right.
Well, it's created a lot of problems.
Right.
And kind of that's what I thought about when I was writing that.
And it is very interesting when you look at the male-female happiness levels. They test these every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that male and female happiness was pretty on par before the feminist and the sexual revolutions. They were pretty much identical. Once the feminist revolution started going, then they became a little bit more striated, where male happiness was greater than female happiness. But the idea of the feminists were, well, we're just bringing issues to the surface, and women are having to confront their oppression, and so, of course, they're going to be more unhappy. But the idea was, if we win, female happiness will exceed that of male happiness. Since the feminist revolution, women's happiness has plummeted. Men are way more happy than women now. Like the differences are stark. Like they're not even close anymore. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, what you're hitting at there is if we're biologically created and engineered in a particular way to take one of the most important and foundational aspects of your being and you just rip it from yourself, how can you do that without damaging something in you? And this is not like I'm not saying that women are like getting at all their uteruses taken out or something like that, but I'm saying to deny the gravity, the importance, and the glory of being able to have a womb.
Yeah, the natural body.
The natural body, and to say, I don't want that. I'd rather be a man, right? I'd rather live my life like a male and never bear a child. And if by some unfortunate accident on my part I get pregnant anyway, I want someone to go into my womb and take it out, because I don't want to be a womb for that child. I don't want my womb to do its natural function. That's really radical and kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's a ramification for any biological species that goes against its very purpose for existing.
Right.
And I know that sounds sexist in our world, but there's a reason why there are female monkeys.
Right.
And there's a reason why there's female birds.
Right.
And there always is going to be a consequence to go against the natural. Even in the species world, in the animal world, the animal kingdom. If there's a interesting, weird, mutated bird that cannot produce, according to its biology, then it doesn't produce something better.
Right.
It always dies.
It's a defect.
It's a defect.
Yeah.
Something happens wrong.
And when you want to see this just on display, just go to the zoo. You know, compare the animals in the zoo to animals that you find in nature. They don't look happy in the zoo. Why? Because you've taken away their purpose. They're not hunting. They're not gathering. They're not procreating. Most of them have been spayed and neutered, so they can't procreate. They can't raise children. And the fire, like the will, the drive that is usually in those animals is gone. You know, like me and we love going to the zoo, but it's so you go to the zoo and they're just sleeping all the time. You know, the animals just
they're
have
just
nothing.
bummed.
They're just super bummed, which like makes you feel bad going to the zoo.
Yeah, I'm paying to contribute to this.
I'm contributing to this poor animal's suffering.
But that's a great kind of analogy to this, because you know, there's anti-zoo people, and the reason why is because they would say it's not natural.
Right.
Well, why are you saying it's not natural? You know, why are you saying it's not natural? Well, isn't it natural for them to be out in the woods? That's what you're saying.
Right.
It's more natural for them to be in their biological, naturalistic environments, bearing kids and finding mates and doing what they do.
Right.
And to deny them of the natural is wrong.
Right.
You would say that.
Right.
Well, to deny you, a human, of the natural, is that wrong?
Right.
You know, and people will say, no. You know, no, it's not. You know, for us having babies, you know, we can get rid of that baby. Well, you are, but you're getting rid of the natural.
Right.
That is the natural. That's what we're doing.
Right.
You know.
And that's why, again, that analogy does work, because it's the idea of man, something with a higher intellect, messing with the natural for their own means and their own ends. And that's why the people who are animal lovers are like, that's wrong, that's evil. Well, why is it evil for us to do it to another animal, but it's not evil for us to do it to ourselves? You know, does man not have more worth than the animal? And if so, then isn't it more atrocious that we mess with our own naturalistic functionality as opposed to the naturalistic functionality of an animal?
Yeah, I think the better argument she were to make, if she wants to go, you know, the naturalistic route, and she really wants to be consistent with doing what's natural to biology, is if she has a child, to abort the child not abort, but kill the child after it's born.
Right.
I think that would have been more consistent.
Right.
Meaning, you know, because animals do have offspring, and they'll kill their offspring.
Right.
You know,
for various reasons.
For various reasons. Sometimes even for food.
Right.
And so, if she said, "Hey, I believe it's more natural for us to just have babies and then kill them,"
right?
You know, at least that's more animalistic, natural. But obviously, she's trying to. It sounds like live in a naturalistic philosophy. But yet she's not. But yet she has this kind of morality that she's trying to toe as well.
Right.
And you can't really have one or the other. You gotta take your pick.
Right.
Here.
And it's very disturbing to me on two levels. The first one is, like we've been talking about, the devaluing of women in our society.
Yeah.
That this is seen. It's seen as a glorification of women, but you have to see it for what it is. It's a destruction of women. It's an annihilation of women and what makes women so precious.
Yeah.
When you go through the Bible, they didn't feel like the biblical authors never had to defend these points when they made them. You know, Paul in 1 Timothy 2 talking about women being saved through childbirth, or in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 talking about a woman's value as all men have to come from women. You have this idea in the Bible that a woman's ability to bear children is a great gift that God has given them. It's an amazing glory. And again, none of the biblical authors felt the need to defend that, because they just assumed everyone knows this, right? It's just like, it's totally natural. How could you not see this as being something glorious that God has given them? And he actually even makes that argument to chauvinists of like, well, if men are really better, why has God given them this particular glorious purpose of gestating life and producing it?
Yeah, men don't get too cocky because you come from women.
That's right. That's exactly correct. That's his argument. And even in the early feminist movement, there were multiple feminists, I'm kind of blanking on her name, but I think one was Simone de Beauvoir, and she was talking about how they wanted women to be able to compete with men. And her argument was, we need to sterilize women. And people are like, why do we need to sterilize women? And she said, well, because if a woman has the opportunity to be a mother, there is no amount of success that will pull her away from that.
Right.
That was her argument. She didn't believe it was possible to actually get women to believe that we don't want to have kids of their own volition.
Yeah, and wait, say that last statement.
She didn't think it was possible to convince women en masse that they don't want to have children. She didn't think that was possible. She thought that they had to force that lifestyle upon them. And now we're in this world which she didn't think could happen, where the majority of women don't look at motherhood as being awesome, even if they want to. And again, there's nothing wrong with this. You know, my mom worked when I was a kid, but even if they have kids, the idea is like, being a mother, you know, being a homemaker. That's like, do I really want to do this? You know, isn't that a waste? You know, like what am I doing with my life? You know, and it feels draining. A lot of women talk about feeling drained as mothers, and feeling like I want to work. I want to give my child to a nanny. And again, there's nothing wrong with that inherently, but there is something really weird in our culture where a lot of women are saying that, right? Usually the women who wanted to work were looked at as the outliers. It's like, hey, that's great, but you're like, you're odd. You're an oddity. Now the woman who's like, I want to stay at home and I like doing this, that's the weird woman. You know, that's the strange woman.
And this is interesting. Is that you would think in a patriarchal world that, you know, Robert Jensen and all these people that we, you know, look at that talk about the patriarchy structure being the problem, you think that in a heavy patriarchy, you would have a system that would set up to be against women having children.
Right.
It would be
exactly what I would expect.
It would be a male dominant, you know, like being a male is the best.
Right.
And the more women are like men, the better.
Yeah.
You know, that's what you would kind of think.
Yeah.
It's patriarchal.
And in fact, you know, you go through history, that's exactly what the patriarchal systems did. So with your wife, you would just have her as a companion, but you would usually get a concubine or a maid or a slave, and she would bear your children. So, like, it was just this oppression of women. I'm going to use you for your womb, essentially. Mm-hmm. And, you know, then my wife will have more dignity. So that is exactly what you would expect in patriarchal societies.
Yeah, and they used women, certain women, for their wombs,
right.
And then they used their wives for, you know, to be like a trophy wife or something. That's what the rich did anyway.
Right.
But, you know, but it's interesting that now that there is more of an equal footing, and as things get more of equal power in the power structure, becomes more balanced between male and female, you would think that a more matriarchal kind of view would be, let's really promote the wonderful wombs and naturalism and differences that we have as women. And let's make law that benefits motherhood.
Right.
Let's make it so people that are poor, that have children, that are pregnant, we give them extra money so they can bear children and take care of their children, because we are really promoting women.
Right.
And what makes a woman different from a male female is their womb.
Right. And we're doing the opposite.
And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
It does. You know, like this year alone, the current presidency, they have given checks to women. Like, we get it, we're thankful for it, but you know, I hate what it's for. We get $300 every month so that we can send our kid to childcare. Like, that's what it's for. So in other words, they're encouraging women. They're giving money to women, saying, don't take care of your kids. We don't want you to raise your kids. We want to raise your kids. The state wants to be their mother.
Oh, that's interesting.
And not only that, you'll probably like this, because this is your home state, man. This is where you're born and bred. California has declared themselves a sanctuary state for abortion, a preemptive strike against Roe versus Wade being overturned possibly. And what that means is that they will pay you to come to their state to abort your child. So if you're out of state and you live in Texas or whatever and you can't have an abortion, they will cover your hotel, they will cover the abortion procedure, and they may even give you like a little bit of money to come there specifically to abort your child. And they're giving money to doctors to work in abortion facilities. They're giving them extra money to work in abortion facilities. So like you said, it's the exact opposite. We're not giving money, the government's not giving money to help mothers and supporting motherhood. We're giving money for the opposite, to destroy motherhood.
Yeah, and that's weird, right? Because you would think a patriarchal structure would be one that would definitely destroy motherhood,
Right.
Because it's patriarchal,
Right.
and you would think a matriarchal one would be one to very much promote a woman having children and really be for
Right.
the having of children,
Right.
because that is the naturalistic way.
And that's what you see in matriarchal cultures, right? So have been some throughout time, more rare, but they're there. They actually, the reason why the women rule is because they bear children, right? So that's the idea. Why should women rule? Because without them, our society collapses and dies.
Yeah.
So the matriarchy is upheld in the idea of from their wombs come all of us.
Yeah.
And, even in Christianity, that's why Mary was so lauded, because from her comes the Messiah. Life comes into the world through the legs of a woman, right? Not a man, right? Joseph doesn't contribute.
Yeah, and this is interesting because if you have an argument against the patriarchy, then you might have a problem here.
Right.
Because if your argument is against the patriarchy over the last 6,000 or so years, well, there's one thing that the patriarchy has done in the past. They have definitely seen the value of a womb.
Mm.
Now, they might not have treated women properly,
Right.
how they ought to be treated, but they certainly have respected the idea of a woman being able to bear children.
Right.
And that was of utter importance.
Right.
And so they saw the value of that, and that's weird that such a patriarchal culture, whether Mesopotamian culture, early European cultures, even Aztec culture, you think highly patriarchal societies, but yet they very much value their moms.
Right.
They value moms, and that was important. And it would be weird to see that that moving away from patriarchy,
Right. That we think we are.
yeah. But we're really
But maybe we're taking away the one thing the patriarchy got right. We're fully denigrating women.
Yes.
And that's the danger. And this is women are under assault and they don't even know it. This is the crazy thing. Even with the transgender movement, just this week, there's a man, a biological man who is now identifying as a woman, crushed all the females, wiped them off the board in swimming. Just like crushed all the times, annihilated them. So all these women that worked super hard, trained, swam, beat their peers, all their times that have been these records
done
have been crushed. And now who's on top? A man, right? So because of what we're doing as a culture, we think we're uplifting women, but we're crushing them. And I think it's so interesting. This is the last point I wanted to ask you about. So in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, which we're going through on Wednesdays, there's an interesting statement where Satan attacks the mother, right? You see this really interesting moment where the mother, clearly denoting either Israel or Mary herself, is giving birth to the Messiah. And Satan doesn't attack the son, he attacks the woman. Like, he goes to war with the woman. And there's other interesting passages in Daniel chapter 11 where it talks about the Antichrist as someone who doesn't regard women. Like, what do you think about that and what's going on?
I find that we could do a whole podcast on that, because
Right.
I have thought more about that book of Daniel passage, that he's not a regarder of women,
Right.
over the last 2 years than I ever have.
Right.
And I've just been like, this is so weird what our culture's doing, the paradoxes
Right.
of patriarchy, and how our system is saying, we're for women, but yet, like we're talking about, seems to be an utter undermining of women.
Right.
And through the transgender world too, that's happening in our culture, you get to see the scripture and you start going, I wonder what this is saying.
Right.
What is going on here? So maybe we should dedicate a podcast to
Yeah, maybe next week we'll do it because we're out of time. But yeah, maybe next week that'll be our topic.
Yeah, a lot of weird paradoxical stuff taking place. So hey, thanks for listening. You guys take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Check out runninglight.org to begin our 2 video series, Take Flight and Love or Lust. You can also send us questions on Twitter at Running Light or on our runninglight.org podcast page. Like us on Facebook at Running Light Ministries, Psalm 36:8. They are abundantly satisfied with the fullness of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your pleasures.